This story happened a long time ago when I was a kid, around 2003. I was about 6 or 7 years old at the time, and I remember it pretty well. I loved Halloween because of all the candy I could get while trick-or-treating. It was always a fun day. That year, I went trick-or-treating with my older sister, who was about 10. Our parents let us go around the neighborhood by ourselves while they stayed home with our younger brother, who was only 3. Our neighborhood had a lot of houses, and at the end of our street there was a park with more houses beyond it. We planned to stay close to home, as our parents had told us not to go too far. We left just as the sun was starting to set. I was dressed as a race car driver, though I don't remember what costume my sister had. There were other kids out trick-or-treating too, and we started going house to house on our street. As we were walking, I noticed a van drive by. It didn't seem too strange at first, but then, just a minute later, the van passed us again, going really slowly. I remembered my parents always telling us to be careful around slow-driving cars, but I figured it was probably just someone dropping off their kids. We didn't think much of it and continued trick-or-treating. After we finished our street, we moved on to the next one. As we were almost done with that street, the same van drove by again, still moving really slowly. My sister noticed it too, and mentioned how strange it was that we kept seeing the van. It was a tan van, and I couldn't see the driver clearly. We made our way toward the park at the end of our street, and that's when the van showed up again, driving even slower this time. It stopped near us, and the driver rolled down the window. He was an older man with a gray beard, glasses, and a baseball cap. He smiled and held out a big bowl of candy, saying, "Hey kids, come get some candy." We'd been taught never to approach strangers or strange cars, but since it was Halloween, it didn't seem as scary. My sister started walking toward him, and I followed. He told us to take as much candy as we wanted, so we each grabbed a couple of pieces. The man then told us he had even more candy in the back of his van and pointed to the side door. At that moment, we both knew something wasn't right. My sister shook her head and said, "No thanks." The man stayed friendly, but we quickly walked away toward the park. I remember feeling really uneasy, and as we left, I could see the man still sitting in his van, watching us. We continued trick-or-treating on another street, but we couldn't stop thinking about the van. After filling our bags with candy, we decided it was time to go home. As we were heading back toward the park, we saw the van again. It was coming down the street from the other end. My sister pointed it out, and we both started running toward the park, trying to get away before the van could reach us. We made it back to our street and didn't see the van again, at least not right away. When we finally got home, it was around 9 p.m. We started eating candy and watching TV, trying to forget about the creepy van. But then, while I was sitting in the living room, I looked out the window and saw the van driving by our house again. I called for my sister, but she was in the kitchen with our parents. The van stopped right in front of our house, and my heart started racing. I yelled for my parents, and they came into the room just as the van started driving away. We told them everything about the man and the van, and they reminded us about the importance of being careful around strangers. We thought that would be the end of it, but later that night, while I was still in the living room, I heard a car outside. I peeked through the blinds, and the van was back again, moving slowly down the street. This time, the driver actually got out of the van and started walking toward our house. I shouted for my parents, and my dad rushed to the front door. As he opened it, the man saw him and immediately turned around, running back to his van. He got in and drove away quickly. That's when my parents called the police. The police came a little while later and talked to all of us. We reported the man in the van as suspicious. Thankfully, we never saw him again after that night. Looking back, I realized just how close my sister and I may have come to being in real danger. We were never going to go into his van, but the fact that he wanted us to was really scary. Here's my story from last Halloween. I was at home in the basement watching a movie with my friend. We had hung out with some other friends earlier and decided to chill and watch some movies, not even scary ones. Throughout the evening, a few trick-or-treaters came by. My house is in a quiet neighborhood with large properties, but the neighborhood kids still come around for candy. I had a bowl of candy by the door and would get interrupted every 10 or 15 minutes by the doorbell. That only lasted until about 9 or 9:30 p.m., and after that it got quiet. So when the doorbell rang at almost 11 p.m., it felt strange. I went upstairs to check, leaving my friend in the basement. When I got to the door, I saw someone dressed as a cat standing on the front step. The person looked a bit too tall to be a kid, but maybe they were just an older trick-or-treater. The costume was kind of creepy because the mask was big and realistic, so I couldn't see their face at all. I decided to open the door since I still had some candy left. When I did, the person said, "Trick or treat," but I could tell from the voice that it was a man, not a kid. I laughed a little and asked how old he was, but he didn't answer. He just stood there. I gave him a piece of candy, and as I did, I joked that it was a little late to be trick-or-treating. He didn't respond, but instead he took a step closer to me. That freaked me out, so I stepped back inside and closed the door, telling him good night and locking it behind me. When I glanced out the window, he was still standing on my front step. It was weird, but I figured that was the end of it, so I went back downstairs. We unpaused the movie, thinking that was the last of the trick-or-treaters. But a minute later, the doorbell rang again. I paused the movie and rolled my eyes, feeling annoyed. I was pretty sure it was the guy dressed as the cat, but what could he possibly want? I told my friend about him, and she followed me upstairs. Sure enough, the guy was still there, standing on the front step. I had no idea why he was still there. I already gave him candy, and he wasn't even a kid. He was a grown man, and I didn't know him. I decided not to answer the door this time. My friend and I just stood there, watching him for a minute. He didn't move, but eventually we went back downstairs, hoping he would leave. About 10 minutes passed, and everything seemed fine. We were on the couch, watching the movie in the basement. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something outside one of the small basement windows. The basement is mostly below ground, but there are a couple of windows near the top. When I looked closely, I saw the cat mask staring in at us. The guy was there, looking at us through the window. I screamed, and my friend did too. We both ran upstairs, totally panicking. After calming down a bit, I decided to check the backyard from a different window. I didn't see anyone, so I turned on the lights outside, but he was gone. We checked every window in the house, and thankfully he was nowhere to be seen. The guy didn't come back for the rest of the night. I never found out who he was or what he wanted, but the way he acted was super creepy, and I'm glad it didn't turn into something worse. A couple of years ago on Halloween, I was at home in my small house in a quiet neighborhood. I don't really celebrate Halloween much, but I like to put up a few decorations and hand out candy to the kids. Normally, I'd get about 10 or 20 trick-or-treaters. That year seemed pretty typical. I had a few decorations on my front step and a bowl of candy ready inside. After work, I was just hanging out in the living room. The kids started showing up early and everything seemed normal. Around 7:30, I heard the doorbell ring again. I got up to answer it and saw two kids dressed as superheroes, maybe around 10 years old. I gave them candy and said hello. One of the kids then asked, "Who was the guy that ran behind your house?" I was confused and asked him what he meant. He explained that when they were walking up my driveway, they saw a man dressed all in black with a mask covering his whole face, standing near my door. As they got closer, the man suddenly ran around to the back of my house. The kid asked if the man lived there or if he was trying to scare them. I didn't know what to say. I told them I didn't know anyone like that and guessed it might have been another trick-or-treater. The kids insisted that the man was definitely an adult, which made me a bit uneasy. After sending them on their way, I wasn't sure if they were just messing with me or if they were serious. But something about it felt strange, so I decided to check. I went to the back of my house and looked out the window, but I didn't see anything. The lighting back there wasn't great, so it was hard to be sure. Figuring it was probably nothing, I went back to the living room and sat down. A few minutes passed with no more trick-or-treaters, but then I heard the sound of my back door rattling, like someone was trying to open it. Immediately, I thought about what the kid had said. I got up and walked to the back of the house. When I peeked out the window, I could sort of see someone standing there, though my view was blocked a bit. It was a man dressed in all black, including a mask. This was definitely the guy the kids were talking about. He was backing away from the door, moving further from the house. I quickly flipped on the back porch light, and as soon as I did, the guy took off running. I saw him clearly for a moment as he sprinted across my yard and around to the front of the house. He was tall, at least 6 feet, and dressed entirely in black, with his face fully covered. I couldn't tell anything else about him. I went back to the front of the house and saw him walking down the street before he disappeared from view. For the rest of the night, I only had a few more trick-or-treaters. I kept looking out the windows to make sure the man didn't come back, and thankfully he didn't. Thinking back on it, I'm really glad that kid told me about the man. It creeps me out to wonder who he was or what he wanted. I'm guessing he was trying to get into my house through the back door and ran off when I turned on the light. I don't know if he picked my house randomly or if there was a reason, but I sure hope he never comes back. When I was about 12 years old, Halloween was one of my favorite times of the year. I loved hanging out with my friends, dressing up in funny costumes, and of course collecting as much candy as possible. One Halloween, my friend Sean came over to trick-or-treat with me, and he was going to spend the night afterward. I lived with my mom and older sister, but my sister wasn't home that night. She was at her best friend's house. Sean and I left the house around 5 p.m. to start trick-or-treating. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, but there were plenty of houses nearby, so it was a great spot to get candy. We spent hours going from house to house, filling our bags until they couldn't hold any more. By the time we decided to head back home, it was around 8 p.m. Once we got home, we dumped out our candy and started sorting through it. My mom went to bed not long after since she had work the next day, but Sean and I were excited to stay up late. We went to the living room, turned on the PlayStation 2, and started playing video games, planning to stay up for hours. About 10 minutes into our game, the doorbell rang. Sean and I thought it was strange because it was already past 10 p.m., but maybe it was a late trick-or-treater. My mom had turned off the front porch light before bed, which usually meant no more candy, but I figured it was worth checking. Sean followed me to the front window, and when I peeked out, I saw a man standing on our front step. He wasn't a kid, and he wasn't in a costume either. He was just standing there facing the door. I didn't recognize him, and that made me nervous. Sean and I quickly closed the curtains, hoping he hadn't seen us. We didn't know what he wanted, but there was no way I was opening the door that late at night. The man rang the doorbell again, but after that, it got quiet. I assumed he had left, so Sean and I started to relax. Just to be sure, Sean suggested we check the window again to see if he was really gone. When I pulled back the curtain to peek outside, the man was still there, this time right by the window looking straight at me. I quickly shut the curtain again, and both Sean and I ran upstairs as fast as we could. We went straight to my bedroom and shut the door, trying to calm down. I just hoped the man would leave. While we were talking about how creepy it was, we suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking downstairs. That's when the real fear set in. We rushed out of my room and into my mom's bedroom to tell her what was going on. She immediately called the police and I locked the bedroom door. We all went into the closet and stayed there, hoping we wouldn't hear any footsteps coming up the stairs or someone trying to open the door. It felt like forever, but after 10 or 15 minutes, the police finally arrived. They searched the house, but the man was already gone. He had broken the living room window to get in, and some things were stolen from downstairs. I was just relieved that he was no longer in the house. That Halloween night was the scariest I've ever experienced. Even though the man never came back, I was terrified for the rest of the night. It was Halloween, and my friends and I got invited to an exclusive party that also had a haunted house. I wasn't much of a party person, so I wasn't really excited about going, but my friends insisted. Since not everyone was into costumes, they said we at least had to wear masks. They even got me one, so I couldn't make an excuse to skip the party. We headed to the venue, which was just a few blocks from our apartment. The house was decorated really well. Gravestones, fake corpses hanging from the trees, and even a creepy altar where it looked like nuns were about to perform some kind of sacrifice. There was art on the wall that made it look like the devil was trying to break out. The house was huge, and you had to go through the haunted house first to get to the party. There were 4 of us, me and 3 of my friends. As soon as we arrived, we went into the haunted house together. There were flashing lights everywhere, and they hurt my eyes, so I closed them for a moment. When I opened them again, I realized I was all alone. My friends were gone. Suddenly, the lights went out, and I was left in complete darkness. Then, a row of lights appeared, leading me forward. I figured it was the way out, so I started following them. I had only taken a few steps when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw a man wearing a mask standing there. At first, I laughed, thinking he was part of the haunted house just trying to scare me. But then I noticed he had his hand in his hoodie pocket, and it looked like he was holding something. I couldn't tell what it was, but I started feeling uneasy. As he came closer, I backed away. Then the light hit the object in his hand, and I saw it was a knife. My heart sank. "Oh man," I muttered as he took a swing at me. I instinctively raised my arm to block the knife and felt a sharp pain as the blade cut into me. He swung again, but I managed to dodge it and push him away before I took off running, blood pouring from my arm. I followed the lights, running through the haunted house, trying to find the main party where I could get help. But just as I reached the end, the man jumped on me from behind, throwing me to the floor. Without thinking, I elbowed him in the face, hitting him square on the nose. I pushed him off and got up, screaming for help, but the people at the party just laughed. They thought it was part of the show. Before I could react, the man was on me again, this time straddling me with blood dripping from his nose. He raised the knife and aimed it at my throat. I managed to grab the knife halfway, but not before it sliced into my palm. I screamed for help again, but no one came. The knife was getting closer to my neck, and I thought this was it. Suddenly, one of my friends appeared and punched the guy hard in the face. The attacker recovered quickly, and before my friend could hit him again, stabbed him twice in the stomach. My friend grunted and fell to the floor, and that's when the other partygoers finally realized this wasn't part of the act. People started screaming and backing away. The man ran off as a few people rushed to help me. I ended up with 13 stitches, and my friend had to go to the ER. Luckily, the police caught the guy. He claimed he didn't know what came over him and said the flashing lights in the haunted house messed with his head. Of course, that's just a lousy excuse. I'm pretty sure he's going to try to plead insanity, but I don't think that's going to work.